Hi, this is Doug Campbell-John, and welcome to this episode of Revenue Renegades. This week, I'm incredibly excited to welcome Henry Schuck, the CEO and founder of ZoomInfo and many other companies before that, to the show. Welcome, Henry.
Thanks for having me, Doug. Great to be here with you.
So, as a fellow founder, I always like asking first about the startup story. I love, for many people who don't know, ZoomInfo was Discover.org when you started. The crazy story that I was reading about is you started it while you were still in law school, right? So tell me a little bit about that and kind of what was the aha moment.
Sure. So I started it after my first year in law school, but I had worked at a similar company when I was in college. So between my freshman year and graduation, I worked at a small company called iProfile. So this is like 2001 to 2005, and saw this like tremendous amount of demand for data on companies and the people who worked at those companies and what sort of projects and initiatives they were working on and what was their tech stack, what did that look like. There was this huge demand, but there wasn't much of a business around what we were selling. It was like a couple of college kids and the founder, and I didn't see like a future at that company. So I left, I went to law school, and after my first year, a buddy of mine called me and said, I want to start something like this, but in a kind of a different market segment, because I don't want to compete with these guys, but I don't know what to do. Will you start it with me? And, fast forward from then 6 weeks, and he had quit his job, moved across country to Columbus, Ohio, and we had agreed to start this business together. I put $25,000 on my credit card. He put $25,000 on his credit card. We just started building the data asset. Look, today when you think about building data assets, one of the things I always think about is like, how do you build a moat around that data asset? And back in 2007, when we built the company, to gather this type of data on companies and people who worked at those companies, it was fundamentally brute force. And so we spent half of our days online and on the phone calling into companies, figuring out who was in the IT departments of those companies, building out org charts of those companies. And then we spent the second half of our days marketing that and trying to set up demos for our platform. And so we figured out all these tricks on how to get phone numbers. Like if you used the Cisco system, there was a way to get to the directory and get all the numbers. If you used an Avaya system, you could hit *6 and start getting all of the phone numbers. And so we spent all this time like in a brute force way gathering this data and then taking it to market. I'll tell you, I had this moment when I first realized that there was a real business here. Besides, that was like independent of what I had seen at iProfile. And I was in my car. I had just gone to the student rec center at Ohio State, and I had an email back from a guy who ran sales at a cybersecurity business. And he basically explained back to me what our founding sort of thesis was, which was lots of information on Fortune ranked companies, basically no information on mid-market companies. And he called me and said, like, look, we sell to a bunch of mid-market companies. We've never seen a data asset that included data on mid-market companies. Everybody's focused on the Fortune ranked businesses. We would love to be a customer of Discover.org. What do I need to do? And it was like, and that was a buyer I was like familiar with. I knew the company, and I was like, okay, there's a real thing here. And then we were kind of off to the races. We did 300 grand of revenue in our first year, 800 in the second, 1.7 in the third, 5.5 million in the fourth, 15 million, 25 million, and then it was kind of off.
Amazing. And you're going to law school for this whole time? You didn't drop out?
First 2 years I went to law school. I moved all my classes to the evenings. So you're usually, when people go to law school, they take like the classes that are going to be on the bar exam. And so they take like commercial paper and like criminal law too, so that they're really prepared to go take the bar exam. I took whatever was available between 3 p.m. and 10 p.m. because I would work till 3. And then, so then I had malpractice in the law, social studies in the law, just a bunch of kind of whatever was available in those hours. That's what I was taking. think maybe the most interesting thing is I finished law school, I took the bar, and then I didn't have responsibility after like 7 o'clock. And so I'd work till 7. And I remember coming home one day, having dinner, and I turned on the television and American Idol was on. And I never watched American Idol before. And I remember sitting there going, oh, like, this is what American life is actually like. You finish work, you come home, you have dinner, you watch one of these shows, The Bachelorette or American Idol. And this was like a part of my life I never had, because it was just like start at 7, end at 10 p.m., go to bed, do it again. And so actually finishing law school and then being able to focus entirely on the business, changed the trajectory of the business, first of all. And then second, like, actually I found more time than I knew what to do with.
So when did you make the decision? You're like, hey, I'm not going to be a lawyer. This thing has legs. I'm gonna do this full time.
Basically right away,
Okay.
because I said like, look, I'm going to finish law school and I'm going to take the bar exam, and I want to be able to have like law as a fallback to
Hmm.
this. But I'm fully dedicated to this business. I'm not going to go interview with big law firms. I'm not going to I left my summer internship when we started the company. And so I was pretty much all in at the beginning, but I wanted the licensed attorney thing as like one final risk policy.
That's impressive. What were some of the early decisions you made or strategies that kind of enabled that early growth?
So first, we started off operating in a pretty tight niche where we were selling data on IT decision makers to companies that sold to IT decision makers. And it was focused on mid-market companies. That's who we were. That's all we did. And so our ICP was very focused, right? So we were only talking to software companies or cybersecurity businesses or services and staffing businesses that we knew were doing a lot of sales to IT. And so I think that was probably the main thing. We knew like we were going to be this one thing to this one marketplace. We knew they needed that. And so we were able to be really, really focused on that marketplace for years. Maybe the first 10 years, all we did was IT decision makers at mid-market to Fortune ranked businesses. Eventually we like expanded how many companies we covered, but it was always sort of like, who's the technology decision maker and who reports to them and how do I get a hold of them and build an audience around them? That was our like specific niche focus for at least the first decade.
I remember the first time I saw Discover Org, and I was blown away. I was like, I don't know what moles they have inside these companies, but this is insane. And I think that was the one thing. I mean, like early on, you focused on this kind of very premium human verified data, while a lot of competitors were doing this kind of automated scraping. So what kind of inspired you to do that approach as opposed to the more technological?
I think a couple things. One, it turns out if you ask people nicely to what somebody's phone number is or who they report to, they'll just tell you what their phone number is and who they report to. You don't need a mole inside the company. But way back in the day, I met with one of my partners, and my partner, like one of our outside, like distribution partners, and he was like, the thing that is so unique about Discover Org that you don't get from anybody else is that you have direct dial phone numbers.
Mm.
And there are all of these inside sales teams, and their job is to call people, but they don't have phone numbers. And we have all these studies that show that when you have a direct phone number, you're way more productive. You convert at a much higher rate. And so then our job is just to get our customers to get their sales teams to make phone calls. But when you have a direct dial phone number, there's just no excuse. And you guys are the best in the world at direct phone numbers. And I remember like exactly where I was when he told me this. Like it was this like key moment at the company where I went, oh, like we have to really lean into that. And so I went back to the office. I created dashboards all over that tracked our direct dial phone number percentage. We were intensely focused on adding direct phones for our customers. And then that was a huge differentiator for many, many years. I think of that as like a key moment in the growth of the business, and like that like locked in product market fit in a different way than we had. Like we had accidentally stumbled upon it, but now we were going to be intentional about it. And then the second thing was I met like in 2014 with Bombora, which is a company that provides intent data. It was like when they were just launching the business. And they pitched me on this like ad data and people engaging with ads. And if you've ever like worked in the ad tech space or tried to like understand it, it's really tough to understand. There's cookies and DSPs and SSPs and all of this like stuff. I didn't understand it at all. It took me like 7 meetings. And I finally was like, oh, I see. We can actually tell our customers when their prospects are researching certain topics in the marketplace. That's a big deal, and it's something that nobody in our space is offering today. And I can take it and make it available to salespeople. And so we signed on as an exclusive partner of Bombora in early 2015 or late 2014. And then we were out in the marketplace with intent data married to company and contact and technographic data. And that was like another huge advantage for us for a couple more years. And every year I kind of think about like, where is that next direct dial phone number, intent epiphany that we can bring in that adds value to our customers and significantly differentiates us in the marketplace.
You've spoken a lot about your kind of intense rivalry with Rain King, right, at the time. And ultimately you acquired them, I think, in 2017. How did that, like what was the mentality inside of DiscoverOrg, first of all, versus Rain King? And then, how did that shape your go-to-market in your business?
Yeah, so I think the biggest difference between DiscoverOrg and Rain King as operating entities as we competed was DiscoverOrg was a bunch of sort of like younger, hungrier, startup feeling folks. And we all were not sure if what we were doing we felt good about what we were doing, but we had never really worked in other businesses. And so we didn't really know if like we were special. We felt special, like we're doing all the right things and we're competing and hungry, but we didn't know if like we were actually good. And so we operated with a real chip on our shoulders. And the way that we were going to prove we were actually good is that we were going to beat Rain King. Like that was like the North Star to like taking the chip off of our shoulder was, hey, here's a company that had VC funding, that has a bunch of leaders who had built other data services businesses that have twice as many, 3 times, 4 times as many people as us. If we can beat them, that's in every deal matters. If we can beat them in any deal, that was a mark to tell us like we're actually good. We're actually building good product. We're actually great at sales. On the other side, at Rain King, it was not like that internally. And instead, it was more like, don't talk to me about that dumb company in Vancouver, Washington, with no experience, no sales reps, never done it before. That's not even a competitor of ours. That's like a low-end, low-market player. I don't even want to hear about those people. And it's like a real competitive advantage to have that in your business. So I think that was culturally the biggest difference, is that we were hungry to prove something. They didn't want to hear about us.
So was that the first acquisition you did?
The first acquisition was iProfile. It was a much smaller acquisition. And then Rain King was the first acquisition of meaningful size.
And so just describing those two cultures, what was that like merging the two companies?
It was actually great because we came in and I think people knew that was a problem internally, right? You had a bunch of like hungry sales reps and marketing folks and product people, and they were like, this company is beating us and we need to figure out how to do something different so that we can beat them. And there wasn't a lot of appetite to do that. So when we came in, we were able to kind of like bring the cultures together. And there's actually like a good M&A lesson here. Like the two big acquisitions we did, one was Rain King, one was ZoomInfo. With Rain King, it was like we kicked down the doors and we were the new boss and we don't really care what you were doing before. We're doing this now. And the reason we were able to come in so confidently was we knew we were both running exactly the same business, except one was growing much faster, doing it way more efficiently, and one was growing slower and was smaller and doing it less efficiently. And so it's easy to go look at that business and go like, let's just do it this way. And it immediately becomes a much more valuable business if they just like adopt all of these things that we're doing. When we acquired ZoomInfo is different. Like we were a higher margin business, and so we were running more efficiently. They were a faster growth business. And so the margins were lower, the growth was higher. And so you couldn't come into that business and go, you're doing it all our way. Because we wanted to like take the growth of that business and not mess that up and marry it to the margins of our business and not mess that up. So it was a lot like, there was a lot more, what's the right word? Conducting to get that right. It was like, hey, okay, you guys are great at engineering. The CTO of ZoomInfo is now going to be the CTO of the combined business. Hey, we were great at go-to-market and sales. The head of sales at Discover.org is now going to be the head of sales at the combined business. You guys are great at marketing. You do that more efficiently than we do. The CMO of ZoomInfo is going to be the CMO of the combined business and down the chain. Whereas at RainKing, there was a completely different approach. You have to take more pain up front because people don't like when you come in and tell them like you're just doing something, you're going to do something completely differently. Whatever your routine was before, get rid of it. This is the new routine. So there was more pain up front, but you got going much faster and there was less nuance. With the ZoomInfo acquisition, there was much more nuance. It was marrying the teams together. That was a more challenging integration experience than RainKing was.
I remember when the acquisition was done, I was also impressed because you didn't just say, hey, listen, the combined entity is now called Discover.org. You
Uh-huh.
went out and did your work and went like, well, there's actually more brand equity in ZoomInfo. Let's change to that, which I thought was a very interesting move.
Yeah, there was a lot more brand equity behind ZoomInfo. It's also a better name. Like I named Discover.org, but I was never like particularly proud of the name anyways. It was interesting because at the board level, there were people who had Discover.org as the best outcome in their like investment life. And they were more attached to the name than I was. And so you had to like we took a half step. So for the first year, it was ZoomInfo powered by Discover.org. And then we were like, we're going to do that for a year and then we'll get rid of the powered by Discover.org part.
So let's just keep moving forward. You decide to take ZoomInfo public during COVID, during the pandemic. That's a pretty bold move. Like what gave you the confidence to proceed when, so many others were delaying or not moving forward?
Well, look, I think first, the business was performing really well. It was a unique asset in the public market because you weren't seeing back then high margin businesses that were efficient, that were also growing the top line in a meaningful way. So I had a lot of confidence from doing like a bunch of investor meetings that this thing was going to do well on the product on the public market. And then COVID hit and we said like, let's just see what happens over the next month. And does the business continue to perform during COVID? And it was. And so then we were really confident, like we could extrapolate results from March and April and say this trend should continue. And it did. And so we felt really good about, like we were the first company to go public after the lockdowns happened. So lockdowns happened in middle of March. We went public June 4th. Super successful IPO. Managing a company on the public market is much different than managing a private company. You have a scoreboard of sorts that ticks every minute. And so you're like constantly managing sort of people's emotions as it relates to that. And so you just have to continue to stay focused on how do I build a long-term durable business here, and think as long-term as you can as you're trying to build it.
What other advice would you give founders who are kind of doing that private to public transition?
Yeah, look, I think maybe my biggest learning was I had a decade of operating experience, a little less than a decade, but 7 years of operating experience with the folks who were on my board when we went public. We had done acquisitions together. We had done financings together. They had seen me regularly. I knew their families. They knew my family. And so those were the people I was responsible to. And so when things went bad, they knew that I was like intensely focused on fixing things. When things went well, they were like patting me on the back. When I had a point of view, they knew from experience how to like judge my conviction on that point of view. Then all of a sudden, you don't have any of that in your public market shareholders. They don't know you. They don't trust you. They have no reason to trust you. Something goes bad, they have nothing to like look at and say like, okay, when that went badly before, Henry was really focused on this. Like, I trust him. I know his character. I know his integrity. And so you go from having like a tight knit group of partners to a bunch of people who don't know you, and you're just judged on your quarterly results. And not only your quarterly results, but like how you forecasted your quarterly results. Like, were you going to be good at knowing what was coming in the future? So lesson number one, or learning number one, your investor and shareholder base doesn't know you anymore. And so you need to think about how you build trust with that investor base. And honestly, the only way you really build trust is that you tell people what you're going to do and then you beat it. And that's like the hardest advice you hear it. Everybody tells you it. And the place where it landed most for me was a guy on my board said, no investor wants to be on vacation with their family, have you report earnings, and have it be a miss that pushes the stock down 20%. Now they have to answer to their bosses and they have to do a bunch of extra work. They don't need a 10x. They just want something that's going to consistently do what you say it's going to do, and it's never going to miss its numbers. And I was like, okay, I understand now the human side of that equation. And you have to be really, really good at being able to forecast the future of your business. And if you don't know what the future of your business is going to be, you either need to tell your public market investors that, which means you're going to take a lot of pain in the short term, but it gives you a place to build up from. And so if you're not sure if you're going to hit your numbers next quarter, your job is to set the expectations at a place where you are sure you're going to hit, because nobody wants to be surprised on their vacation.
One of my favorite phrases is happiness is reality minus expectations, and I think
Yep.
that's exactly what you're talking about
Yep.
there.
Exactly right.
I
Yep.
love it. So you've grown obviously through multiple acquisitions, some of which we've talked about already. How do you think about acquisition targets and aligning with the vision for the company?
Yeah. Today I think about it in a couple of ways. First, we want to own the interface for account executives, account managers, and customer success managers. And so when you think about where an account executive, account manager, account executive does their work today, they're doing it in email, they're doing it in spreadsheets, they're doing it in email, spreadsheets, and a little bit of it in CRM as well. What's become interesting to me, and I'm sure to you too, Doug, is that CRM has lost its place as the source of truth for go-to-market teams. And if you go across account managers and account executives and you say, where do you manage your business? Almost all of them will tell you, I've got a Google sheet or an Excel sheet, and I keep all my accounts and what's happening and my next step at those accounts. And I can't even go into CRM and see which accounts are even in my name because it's like a bunch of weird stuff happening in there. And so, number one, I'm thinking about where are account executives and account managers doing work, and how do I embed ZoomInfo into those areas? And so, is there an acquisition that gets me, embedded into a Google sheet, embedded into email workflow, embedded into CRM workflow? I think that's ZoomInfo for most of that part of it. And then they're doing a bunch of research too. They're researching their accounts. They're doing that on LinkedIn. They're doing it in Google News. They're doing it on the company's website. And so how do I take that research, that spreadsheet, and that email, and are there acquisition opportunities that help me accelerate a product roadmap there? That's one. The second way that I think about it is data. And data is a trickier one because today, there aren't very many data originators. There are a lot of data aggregators and not a lot of data originators. And data aggregators are not that interesting because they're just like, unless they have some kind of super unique supply chain, which I have not found, But unless they have some kind of unique supply chain, otherwise they're all just kind of like buying from the same 8 guys and munging it together and selling it to the marketplace. And so if I run into a data originator that's originating data in a unique way, that's super interesting too, because I think there's a real moat around data origination. And then other countries. So if somebody's figured out how to really nail ZoomInfo in Japan, or ZoomInfo in the Nordics, or ZoomInfo in France, where there's like localized knowledge that's necessary to do that job really well, I think that's an interesting acquisition area for us as well. And then finally, like regardless of what the acquisition is, the big question is, can I take it to market? Because I could buy the coolest, nicest thing. If it sells to a IT decision maker, I get no leverage out of that purchase. If it's a cybersecurity thing, I get no leverage out of that purchase. And so like where I'm thinking a lot about, like if I acquired this asset, does my existing go-to-market engine, distribution engine, benefit from that being a part of what we take to our customer base? And then the final thing I'd layer on there is, we're very focused on moving the business up market into the mid market and enterprise in a much more intentional way. And so anything that I look at, I'm thinking about like, does this serve the enterprise segment of our business?
So it's interesting when you talk about aggregators. There's obviously a ton of folks who are scraping LinkedIn, and LinkedIn's taking a lot of measures to try to shut that down. Or, I've been inside there and know the whack-a-mole game that is. What do you think about aggregators like 5x5?
Interesting. Like, I think that's an interesting data originator for sure. I would put 5x5 in the data origination space.
And then you talk about kind of these, ZoomInfo is a system of engagement, I'll call it, like, where reps are spending their time. Obviously, there's a lot of giants, not as big as you, but, folks like, Clary and Gong and Outreach and others like that are vying for that same pie. Do you see those as all competitors of yours?
I think everybody today is trying to figure out how to own the account executive and account management CSM's workspace.
Mm-hmm.
And I think like what we all benefited from in the earlier days was the SDR inside sales use case. There was so much product market fit with just like, can I give you data that you can make a phone call or send an email with? Like that was the best product market fit that existed. And then now getting into actually the workflow of an account executive and account manager is a more challenging task for sure. I believe that all of the other systems are tied to the CRM. And if you want data to power your engagement engine, you're getting that data from a customer's first party CRM system, and that system is broken. And it doesn't, like, one of the reasons why you haven't seen go-to-market AI take off the same way you saw support AI take off, or knowledge-based AI or ticket-based AI take off, is if you're looking at, support tickets. If I want to build an AI bot to answer all my support tickets, the only data I need is housed in the walls of my company. It's support tickets, it's emails, it's customer support interactions. I can just take that data and the knowledge base, put it into an AI chatbot, and it can answer the questions better than my existing support reps. If I go over to the go-to-market side, my first-party data is necessary, but it's not sufficient to build AI on top of. And so it needs to be married to third-party data that cleanses that data, that gives it additional insights on top of that data, that pulls things like earnings calls and podcasts and job postings and all of this sort of third-party data and brings it together with your first-party data. And so you haven't seen that proliferate because there aren't that many really great providers of third-party data like that.
Yeah, we have a saying at Coffee: you can't have good AI with bad data. And I think that as you said, the data in CRM is garbage for the most part. I mean, like at FlipTop, my last company, we actually were doing, as we were doing kind of machine learning for account and lead scoring. And the thing that we discovered very quickly, and after we had onboarded our first few dozen customers, was the only data we could rely on the CRM was when the rep was going to get paid.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, what's the minimum data I need to go get my commission check? It's probably the deal closed. There's probably the amount is correct. There's at least one contact that's correct. So that was the only thing that we could rely on, because the data quality just fell off a cliff after that.
It's a super interesting thing because like it's like a master stroke and also like a really unfortunate thing for CRM providers, because the master stroke is like every business has problems with the data inside of their CRM systems. And because CRM never provided that data to their customers' problem.
Right.
Like I empathize with you. Your data is a mess. Like, why did you let it get like that? Why did you let reps just put whatever they want in there? Why did you open the top of the sieve and let everything come through? Like, you should definitely do better.
Yeah.
And
And
then on the other
here's some
side,
services we can sell you.
here's some
Yeah.
services that we might be able to sell you to cleanse that. On the other side, of course, your CRM should be pre-populated with company and contact and prospect and cleanse data. Of course, that should be dynamically updated in your CRM system constantly. Like, that is where you go to learn about your customers. And the idea that like it's kind of divorced from that,
Yeah.
great for CRM, not so great for the users and the customers.
For the customers, exactly. So let's shift gears and talk a little bit about AI. Obviously that's become a big part of your strategy as well, and you've introduced ZoomInfo Copilot. Can you just talk about how you think about AI in the ZoomInfo product portfolio?
Yeah, definitely. Number one, what we just talked about here is for AI to work for go-to-market, you need a unified data layer across your go-to-market systems. You need that CRM data, you need your call data, you need your email data, your calendar data, your email data, and then all of that data needs to get married to a third-party data asset that broadens the scope of that data and enriches and cleanses that data. Once you have that unified data asset, then you start thinking about, okay, what are the tasks that an account executive, an account manager, or customer success manager is doing every day that we can apply agents on top of to start doing for them. The most obvious ones are like meeting prep, prioritization of accounts, account planning, call research, follow-up. So what we've started to do with Copilot, the first thing we introduced with Copilot was account prioritization, which by the way, like this was when we really learned how messed up CRM data is. When we started integrating our customer CRM data, what we found, like the number one thing we need to do when you get onto Copilot is deliver you a relevant prioritization of your accounts with signals that you can leverage to engage with your customers. Well, your CRM actually doesn't do a great job of even telling you which accounts are in your name and are in your territory. And so we go through all this pain to create this unified data layer. And then it turns out like we can't rely on your CRM data to even deliver the accounts that are in your name that we can start delivering signal on top of. We actually went out last year, we did an acquisition of a small company called SetSale. And SetSale was focused on how do I aggregate activity up to the accounts that actually matter within a CRM system. Open up an enterprise CRM, there are 17 different Ciscos in there. And how do you know which one is the one that somebody owns or rolls up? And forget about the subsidiaries. Like how many enterprise reps are spending time on an account and then realizing it's a subsidiary that sits in somebody else's patch? Like these are real problems that are happening across businesses. And so the first thing you have to do is give a cleaned, unified data asset that properly tracks what your named accounts are, what's in your territory. And then our job is how do we give you relevant prioritization and relevant signal on top of those accounts? And then from there, we use Copilot to then draft messaging that should engage with that account. And when we draft that messaging, one of the things we do when we onboard our customers is we send an agent out to learn everything it can about a company. It reads its website. If it's public, it reads its earnings calls. It reads expert calls, press releases, job postings, case studies. And then it becomes a brain for every one of our customers. And so when we say, hey, here's a company hired a new chief information officer, it's in your territory, you haven't engaged with it, and it uses a complementary technology. When we draft that message, we have the context behind that account to be able to draft you something that's not going to be perfect, and a human should be involved. We believe a human should be involved there to make it perfect. And then we're setting up sort of all of that work from prioritization of accounts to signals that mean it's important to the messaging that the rep should use to engage. That's Copilot kind of in a nutshell. And it flags both opportunities and risks. A CIO into a net new account, good signal for sales. CIO into a current account might be a tough signal for risk and churn. And the system knows if you're an account manager or an account executive, and it's delivering that signal to you in real time. Where we're going in the future, and we'll have a big launch in May that we're calling the go-to-market intelligence platform. When we launch that, we're now bringing in the ability for a RevOps, sales ops, or a sales leader to actually manage that unified data layer, to use AI to augment it, and then to push the right things to the right people at the right time.
Very interesting. Yeah, it's fascinating when you talk about the data quality issues in CRM and LinkedIn. When I was there, the reps would get their territories in spreadsheets. They wouldn't even put them in CRM, in Salesforce, right?
Crazy.
It's crazy. It's crazy.
It's crazy that it's 2025.
Yeah.
And that's still the case. I did these roundtables with my account executives and account managers the last week. Like every couple of quarters, I go and I just take like a group of account executives and I do like 3 back-to-back meetings with like 10 of them. And I'm like, just tell me everything you hate about ZoomInfo. And I do it with account managers. With account executives, we had just done this resegmentation to the enterprise for enterprise, mid-market, and SMB account reps. And the enterprise reps were like, I can't get a clean list. And I'm like, what are we using to give you a clean list? Like, I cannot believe that like we've somehow stumbled into the same problem that we're solving for our customer base. But it gives you an opportunity to take a look at that data in the CRM system and think about how you're doing subsidiary to hierarchy matching and how you're leveraging the tools that you have at your disposal to be able to give your reps a real opportunity to be efficient. So I think this is a problem that plagues every go-to-market organization out there. And I think we have a real opportunity to win in that category.
Do you find that your reps still, I call it the shadow CRM that every rep I know uses, which is, as you said, I'm using Notion or Granola or, Evernote plus Google Sheets or some equivalent. Do you find that even with all the power of ZoomInfo, you still have some of your reps with a shadow CRM?
Yeah, for sure. People still are using a shadow CRM. And look, part of that I expect to be solved before the end of the year with our launch in May. We are using those teams to understand what we need to build into the product, which is a great advantage for ZoomInfo. And so now when the product is building new product, I'm saying every one of those spreadsheets, I want them all out of here. We didn't succeed in building the product until our reps are managing their books inside of ZoomInfo. And when we've gotten that, great. But that's your first imperative.
So I don't know about you, but I've never been more excited about any technology than AI. But keeping up with it is like drinking from a fire hose, right, these days. How do you stay ahead of kind of the trends and, make sure the team is focused in the right way?
Yeah, so first I have a great chief product officer who's 4 clicks ahead of me on all of this. And he lives around the corner from me, so we drive into the office together a couple of times a week. And so I'm downloading his brain as often as possible. The second is last year I created a Go Fast AI lane at ZoomInfo where I have effectively a chief AI and strategy officer who's an engineer and was the CTO of Chorus, which was one of kind of the first companies that brought AI to go to market. And he has a Go Fast lane. And anything that's cutting edge, I want him to work on, prototype, and then bring into the broader engineering organization. I think that was a great addition. And then finally, I'm doing stuff, on my own. I have Vercel and Replit, and I'm prototyping things. And, if you really want to feel bad about how much you understand, how much on the cutting edge of AI you are, follow tech Twitter. Because there's something that tech Twitter is talking about that I'm I don't understand at all what that means. And so then I'm bringing that back, bringing it to my chief product officer and saying explain to me where on the cutting edge this is. But I'm practicing it. I have a great CPO. We have a Go Fast lane. Those are kind of the things.
So let's do a few wrap ups here. I know this has been a fantastic conversation. I could keep going for hours with you, Henry. Just thinking about this could be your personal life or your business life. If you could automate one task forever using AI, what would it be?
I have an answer for this, but I don't think it's actually possible. So, and I know like that's a tough thing to put out there as it relates to AI because I think almost everything is possible. I would like it to book all of my travel. And that might sound easy, but when I book travel, there's so much happening in my mind about like, am I going to make it back in time for my daughter's play? Like, can I come in and go out at the same day? Am I willing to wake up at 4 a.m. that day when I had a dinner the night before? How many dinners did I have that I means I'm going to be away from my family too much? Is there somebody I know in Chicago that I want to also meet with when I'm there? There's just so much that's like goes into trying to book travel for me, and maybe at the more senior levels in an organization it becomes more complicated. But if it could replicate what's going through my mind when I book travel, that would be a great relief.
Yeah, I use a service called Essentialist that I've used for a few years, and they're booking all these trips for me, and I still am jumping in and going like, no, 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 I'm going to change and do a different flight and do that. Like it's never 100%, right?
Totally. And my executive assistant's been with me for years. She
Mhm.
does a great job 90% of the time, 85% of the time. But then the last 15, I'm like, hey, wait, but this flight will take me to New York, and then I can take the train and get in a day earlier. It's like, how are you gonna?
Yeah, yeah. No, I think that's probably the high water mark is 90%, right? And that
Yeah,
AI
the
could
high
help.
water mark I think is 90%.
Yeah. What's something you're passionate about that might surprise people?
Public libraries.
Okay, that is a
Um,
surprise.
I grew up in public libraries. I would finish school and I'd go to one of two public libraries in my neighborhood and I would do my homework and I would study and I would check out books. And that was where I grew up. When I when I took the bar exam, I studied in a bunch of public libraries all across Las Vegas. So I'm a contributor to public libraries in my neighborhoods, and I feel like they're a great community service.
I love that. I love it. What's one thing you can't live without in your daily routine?
So I have a morning routine that I do every single day that I'm at home. And when I miss out on that routine, it could mess up my full day or could mess up my full week. And so I wake up around 5:30. My wife and I get kind of like an hour together before my daughter wakes up. And so we have coffee, we play Wordle, we catch up with each other. My daughter wakes up, I spend like the next 45 minutes with her and like we catch up. Then I go to the gym and then I cold plunge and I walk her to school every morning and then I go to work. And that's like, if you do that every day, missing that on any day is not awesome.
I love that routine. I remember talking. There was a session where Jack from Twitter slash Square, now Block, was being interviewed and asked like, how do you like run two companies, right? Like, because it's
Yeah.
crazy to think about, just even one at times. And he said, I get 8 hours of sleep, I meditate, I exercise, I podcast every day. And I'm like, well, how do you do that? He said, I put my devices away, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, I'm in bed, reading a old school book, falling asleep, waking up, making a little tea, doing meditation, and then the power walk, supposedly, from his house in San Francisco to the office. And like he goes, I'm looking like those Olympic style runners, but I've got a podcast in. So
Yeah.
by the time I get to the office and shower, I have, gotten a good night's sleep. I've learned something. I've exercised. So even if I'm about to have the shittiest day in the world, it's still going to be good. And I think same thing with what you just described in your routine, especially spending time with your daughter like that.
Takes real discipline.
Yeah.
Takes real discipline. It's really easy to give up on that routine, but once you get it going, you really notice the difference between a day that you did it and a day that you didn't, and then you never want a day that you didn't.
So finally, how can listeners keep in touch with you and kind of help ZoomInfo on their mission?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, so you can follow me there, Henry Schuck, Schuck. You can email me. I'm just henry.schuck@zoominfo.com. I'm on X as well, so you can find me there, but I'm pretty available.
Awesome. Well, Henry, thank you so much for taking the time. I've loved this conversation.
Me too. Thanks for having me, Doug. It's great to see you.
Great to see you.